I'm Dave Baker.
And I'm Spandrew Spice.
Welcome to Deep Cuts, podcast where we pick a topic and walk you through the ins, the outs, and the nitty-gritty, so that you can appear like an interesting and idiosyncratic person at your next forced social function. Today's topic is...
Akira.
What is Akira? Well, it's a manga and anime project created by Katsuhiro Otomo. It follows a group of young children in a post-apocalyptic cyberpunk future Tokyo, as they attempt to fight for their lives against deep state operatives, psychically powered little people, and corrupt bureaucrats. And believe it or not, it also changed the world. This moment, this shot, these animation cells, they changed how the world viewed anime. They became so iconic and so beloved, they ostensibly opened up the West to the intricately woven tapestry of Japanese animation. One film kicked down the door and propelled a fledgling cult preoccupation to a cultural mainstay in America. That film, Akira. Based on the runaway smash hit manga Akira, published by Young Magazine, Katsuhiro Otomo's magnum opus of the same name was viewed by its creator as a failure on its release. In various interviews, he called it his biggest regret. He's even gone on record saying that he knew from the first screening that the film was going to be a failure. And yet, here we are, still talking about it. Spandrew, what is your first experience with Akira? And did it have the stench, the horrible, horrible stench of failure when you first consumed it? Because this is a kind of a revelation to me. I had no idea that it was a massive failure when I first found it. I was like, this is the greatest fucking thing of all time ever. This is amazing.
Yeah, I think maybe a auteur anime director's failure or idea of a failure is like a 12-year-old American boy's idea of like the most badass thing ever made. Because I think my experience with Akira is, I think, you know, my first exposure to anime, I think, was watching the renting and watching anime at video stores, like before even Toonami. I think one of my first exposures to anime was renting the VHS releases of the original first 13 episodes of Dragon Ball, which was like a whole separate version of the show with a different dub than the eventual like Toonami version and the Funimation version, with all different voice actors and stuff like that. And so I feel like I had a very specific idea of what anime was, which was kind of like cutesy, almost feeling like it was for kids, because, you know, that first 13 episodes of Dragon Ball feels very much like it's just a kid show. I think I had seen like Kiki's Delivery Service and some of the other Ghibli movies. I hadn't seen Princess Mononoke yet. Maybe it wasn't out yet. I don't remember the timelines. And then I was with a group of kids, and this kid that was a friend of mine was just describing one of the openings, or one of the opening scenes of Akira, not the motorcycle fight, but the part with the kids running away from the guy who's chasing after him, the little experimented kids with the powers. They're running away from a guy, and at some point he just gets like Swiss cheesed with a machine gun, and just like blood
you're talking about kind of like the cold open. It's basically like there's a secret agent character who's like protecting one of the little kids.
Yes, that's what it is. And
they're like going through a crowd, and there's like a riot happening, and then that guy, just like you're saying, he gets fucking Verhoevened by like a bunch of machine guns.
Yeah, and this, my friend was just describing this scene. It was almost like a bard like coming to a city to like tell the tale of a strong warrior that was traveling the countryside, like fighting bad guys or whatever. Yeah, and he was just describing this to like a group of kids. And so in a way that I feel like happens a lot with stuff whenever you're a kid, I was just like, I was like transfixed by this just description of this thing. And yeah, it was presented to me at my first introduction of it was like the coolest thing, and also like this taboo thing, because it's like you're not supposed to see this. It's like really violent and there's blood and guts. And then I finally saw it, and it, you know, I rented it or something. Like I saw it shortly afterward, and it lived up to the hype. Like, honestly, like I feel like a lot of times you hear that stuff and then you watch it or you hear it or whatever, and you're like, it's not as cool as when that person told about it, but it like lived up to it. So yeah, I remember it as being just like the coolest thing that had ever happened, basically, and that was what everybody thought of it. All the kids that I hung around with, it was like this special thing that somebody had discovered at some point and then shared it with everybody.
Yeah, it's funny because my experience with it is not dissimilar as it being this like singular work. And I don't think when I first watched it, I think I saw it at the end of junior high or beginning of high school. And I didn't know that it was based on a manga. I just knew that it was a movie. And I also I had a really hard time transitioning from Akira to anything else. Like I saw it when I was 13, 14, 15, somewhere in there. And it, like you, blew my fucking socks off. I was like, this is the greatest fucking thing that has ever been made. I love the way this is directed. I love the soundscape. I love the violence. I love the background paintings and the like neo-noirness of it and cyberpunkness of it. I love the voice acting. Because I don't think I saw it dubbed. I think I saw it subbed at first. Because I just remember like the screaming being so like emotionally like gut-wrenching. You know what I mean? And it fucking like flipped me on my ear. Oh, 100%. Yeah. Like, Tetsuo! Like, I went around the house for like weeks just going, Tetsuo! Like, I fucking loved it. But I didn't know what else to transition to, because I didn't have a lot of friends that were into this kind of stuff. And like, it was kind of like the early days of the internet, so I didn't really know how to find other weird dark anime. So I just like Googled or probably Yahoo searched at that point his name, Katsuhiro Otomo, and I found that he'd made some comics, and I found that he co-wrote another movie, but he didn't direct it, Metropolis, which was directed by Rintaro.
Yeah, which is not anything like this at all. I mean,
that was the second anime movie that I ever watched, and I was like, wow, that was cool, but not Akira. Really not Akira.
And there kind of wasn't anything like it, really. I mean, that was kind of the whole thing with it. Is like there were, I mean, in the 90s, what's that animation studio that did all just the hyper violent anime and
oh yeah. And they also at the same studio not Studio Trigger, Studio damn you, Spandrew. If you hadn't asked me this, I would have been able to say it. But it's also like, Ninja Scroll. I mean, the thing is like
Ninja Scroll, Vampire Hunter D. Like they had there was all these anime specifically from this one studio that I kind of think capitalized off of a kind of a movement in the 90s where it was like it was a subgenre of anime that was almost kind of like taken and made the face of anime to make it more popular in the States. And anime had kind of struggled to push through before that. But once they were like, oh, we'll just take all these really hyper violent anime with blood and guts and stuff like that, and we'll just make it be like, this is what anime is. And there's a lot of good like 90s anime, like hyper violent, whatever the term is, OVA. There's a lot of good violent 90s anime OVAs. But the thing about Akira was, it was almost like a Trojan horse, because it was that, but unlike most of those other like really gory, like hyper violent action anime OVAs that they put out in the 90s just to like do well in the States, like it was also like it was like a amazingly beautiful film. So it like stuck with you after that. Whereas the other ones, you watch it, you're like, that was fucking cool, and then you kind of move on. Whereas like Akira just stays with you forever.
Yeah, I mean, part of that is going to be the money poured into it. Part of that is the source material being what it is. And then another part of that is just like as we're going to talk about in the episode as we continue on, Akira came out. There's a period in anime that's usually referred to as the golden age, which is like early 80s to late 80s, where the money and cultural import of anime was there, as well as the creator base having two generations, people who had founded the industry and young up-and-comers who were trying to reinvent the industry. So you had like a real solid knowledge base, auteurs who wanted to break the system, and money and an audience hungry for content. And all three of those things made this soup of all of these.
And Japan was in like a massive economic boom as well.
Oh, yeah, totally. Like in the 80s, they just had tons of fucking money flowing into their economy. And so a lot of that went into entertainment on both sides of it. You know, people buying entertainment and people investing in entertainment to get stuff made. And you know, now that I know more, there's a lot of stuff that's like Akira that I would have loved at 13, like, you know, Appleseed, Ghost in the Shell, Wicked City, you know, all Pat Labor, you know, even some like weird 70s stuff like fucking the early Gundam stuff or Macross. Like there's all of that stuff that I now really love. Cyber City Oedo, 808. Like there's all of this weird noir, science fiction, hyper violent stuff. Even Space Adventure Cobra, which is earlier, it's like the 70s. Like all of that stuff I would have fucking eaten up with a fucking shovel, but I didn't find it at that time because I didn't have a way into the cultural stuff. I didn't know anybody. The internet wasn't really helpful for me because how do you search like, gonna have some cool shit, you know?
Yeah, honestly, like I think the reason why, I mean, I'm speaking from just personal experience, but like that kid I'm talking about, he was like a super rich kid. And I think like that literally was the pipeline of how you found out about stuff. Is like there's some rich kid who like their dad like goes to Japan on a business trip and just brings them back a bunch of weird stuff. And then like they just disseminate it to everybody. Because that's how I found out like all about anime stuff and from him, because his dad would just like go to Japan and bring him stuff back.
The thing that's doubly interesting, I think, about Akira is, at least for me, I kind of discovered Akira twice, because I discovered it when I was a kid and I read it, or I watched it, and it blew my fucking mind and it became one of my favorite movies. And then for whatever reason, I never really tracked down the manga until towards the end of high school, maybe beginning of college. When I read the manga, it like blew my mind again. Like the manga is even better. Like I know this is an insane thing to say, but it really is. Like the movie is fantastic and it's its own thing. But for me, the manga is just like it's on the Mount Rushmore of comics. Like it's fantastic.
Yeah. Well, as much detail as went into the movie and all of the crazy production backstory that went into it, it was still ultimately like a compromise of a vision where, you know, it was taking like little bits and pieces of this story arc and kind of cramming them together to try to like fit all this stuff into what ultimately could never have been anything close to what the manga was unless they did it as a mini series or a full anime. But yeah, I had a kind of a similar situation where I didn't read the manga until I worked at Borders, and which was in 2008. I read it, so it was like a couple years after high school. They just free access to read any of the comics or manga that were there on your break, and I think we even had like a checkout system or something like that. But yeah, I read it then. Running
from 1982 to 1990, and later collected into 6 tankobon volumes, the manga Akira tells the story of a near-future Tokyo after a nuclear bomb has destroyed much of the city and jump-started World War III. We pick up almost 30 years later and follow a small group of street urchins as they attempt to survive in the cyberpunk dystopian world that has grown from the ashes of this terrible tragedy. Tetsuo and Kaneda guide us through a surreal and Kubrickian world filled with hideous body horror, telekinesis, and shadowy deep state operatives. Previous to Akira, Otomo had published 2 short-running series, Domu and Farewell to Weapons, as well as a few short stories. The former architectural student made a reputation for himself for a highly accurate drawings of buildings, mechanized robots, and lifelike humans. Being influenced by Western films and novels, Otomo's style was an outlier in the manga landscape of the day. However, thanks to the success of Akira's manga, he was able to jumpstart a career directing. Otomo rapidly saw a meteoric rise through the animation and filmmaking industries. I just want to underline that for a minute. Like, I think there's something specific about the way that Katsuhiro Otomo draws people, which are they're thin. They have somewhat of the trappings of a traditional manga style, but they also bear a debt to somebody like Mobius, or, you know, they have a kind of neoclassical, almost kind of like fine art aesthetic to the way that the people are rendered. Like, they're not hyper stylized in the way that some people are, like the fucking the Trigun guy, who I can't think of his name off the top of my head. But, you know, he draws like hair that looks like glass shards, or even Akira Toriyama, you know, the fucking like Goku's hair looks like you could like
ridiculous hair that you've come to sort of associate with anime and manga, but really,
yeah. And I love that stuff. Like, I love the way Akira Toriyama draws. You know, he draws those like super cute bubble cars, and like they're fucking awesome. But I think specifically the kind of East meets West fusion that Otomo kind of brought to the foreground is one of the main contributing factors to why the film was such a like massive success. Because it wasn't. I mean, obviously, anime and manga had a cultural mainstay in Japan and all across Asia, and also widely accepted in parts of Europe. But over here in the States, we kind of had like bips and bops, right? We had stuff that was successful, but it was adapted. You know, you don't get Attack on Titan from the success of Speed Racer, you know, which is cool. I love Speed Racer, but like it was like a weird thing that like popped up, and everyone was like, wow, this is like weirdly violent. And then that's kind of it. But yeah, I think the specifics of his drawing style they're so based in reality and so grounded that the extreme elements feel that much more extreme, and they're more, and especially the way he draws faces, I think is pretty applicable to a Western audience. You see, unlike in the States, where comics and film are viewed as distant artistic cousins, in Japan, manga and anime are closely intertwined. In fact, the master draftsman had dabbled in film as a young man, spending 5 million yen of his own money at the age of 25 to create a 16mm live-action film. But it would be animation that would jet propel him to another level. After working on commercials and anime projects as a hired gun, he quickly made the jump to directing, helming a segment in the anthology project Neo Tokyo. It was the experience that Otomo gained on Neo Tokyo and his almost decade-long effort to bring Akira the manga to a close that birthed this moment. The opening of Akira sees two rival gangs warring over turf. The gang we follow, led by Kaneda, and a rival gang, the Clowns, led by a character christened the Joker. Kaneda and the Joker square off at each other, playing a life-or-death game of chicken. And the end result is Joker eating pavement and Kaneda doing this. This moment is so iconic and effortlessly cool that it's been parodied, homaged, and spoofed in nearly all of media since. It's appeared in Batman, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Star Wars, and Pokemon. It was this moment that would ultimately change everything for Otomo. But getting there, that would be the real challenge. All right, so we're watching the fabled clip. Oh my god, look at that fucking background. Fuck me, that's so cool. One of the many things that makes Akira so awesome is the fidelity to reality for certain elements. Oh yeah.
I talked about a lifelong fear of like putting my eye in a microscope from the Phantom movie. That scene where the guy gets knocked off of his bike and then he runs over his arm as he rides by. That just also became this thing in my mind where I'm just like, oh god, like I never want to like put my arm down on a street where like a motorcycle might ride by and run over me or something like that.
I love the way that the actual bike animation is done, because all those bikes and those cars are drawn by fucking hand. And that is insane. Like, they look like they're based on a CG model. Nope. That shit is a fucking drawing. Oh, I love that too. I love the light trails coming out of the back of
the light trails out of the headlights. Yeah, I mean that's what I was talking about before. Like what is looked at as like a failure by the people who produced this movie, like to just a little kid that's never seen anything like that before. That is just the coolest thing you've ever seen. As like,
I mean, I think there's
the beginning of the movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something to be said of like, it's unfortunate that we have to ascribe a monetary value to success and failure in the arts. I mean, obviously it's a business too, so I understand why, but just because Akira didn't make enough money in its initial theatrical window doesn't mean that the whole project is null and void. And I think from Otomo's point of view, the ending of the film and the construction of cherry picking spinal fragments over the course of, the almost decade-long story that he was telling in the manga to try and make a story in the film work is like a near impossible task. And I actually don't know that it is. I think he's right. I think on one level he's right that it is a failure in terms of it's a story that is 99.9% about the vibes and like 2% about like the character arcs and the actual plot construction, and it kind of falls apart at the end, and the ending isn't exactly like kind of what you want, but that's also kind of why it's great. But I kind of don't care about any of that. Like, I kind of like the vibes of it and the technical know-how of it is so impressive that to me makes it a success.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean it sits upon that specific throne of like movies that will endure in a very specific subset of people's minds forever, just simply because they are like aesthetic masterpieces.
Yeah. It's in the same group as fucking Blade Runner,
Blade Runner 2049, a movie like Drive, where it's like there's not like a whole lot that actually happens in that's particularly compelling. Like a guy like pisses off a dude and then runs away from him. But like the style just carries the whole thing. And it goes against that saying of like style over substance is bad, where it's, that's like a general thing that people will say. It's like if it's all style but it doesn't have like these specific things, story, character, all that stuff, then it's bad. And that can often be the case where you're like, this looks great, but this is fucking boring. But like this is like something above that. Like this is like something different.
It's kind of the same way I feel about like Jeff Darrow's Hard Boiled, where like, what is Hard Boiled actually about? I don't know. Like, I guess it's about like a robot guy like fighting for his identity, sorta. But like, who cares? That's not why you go to that. You go to that to experience and live in the world of this like chaotic, hyper violent, hyper detailed mania, right? Like, it's a very, Jeff Darrow's artwork is so lush and meth addict in its approach to everything.
It's for some reason it's always that like cyberpunk aesthetic that is kind of coupled with it, with what we're talking about.
I mean, I also really like the movie Casshern. Do you remember that? The live action adaptation of the anime Casshern. Like, that was another one of those movies where I was like, I don't really know what this movie's about other than like Gennaro, like hero bad guy stuff, but the aesthetic is so intense that I just fucking eat it with a spoon.
Yeah, or just like Tetsuo the Iron Man.
Tetsuo the Iron Man, or even Star Wars. Like,
yeah,
what is, Star Wars is the perfect example of like a vibes movie.
Yeah, this is a whole other episode and rant, but I know exactly what you're talking about because I've had that exact same argument with people that are just like, oh, so-and-so character from the sequel movies is like not developed enough or whatever. Like, watch the first Star Wars movie. Darth Vader is not a character. He just shows up a couple times. He gets more developed in the second and third, but like in the first movie, he's just a guy in a suit.
Yeah. Yeah, but he's still awesome.
Yeah.
It's just
for sure.
The aesthetics of the movie rule the movie, like the idea of lived in future space, with laser swords is like so awesome. that you kind of don't even care that the end of the movie is the main character destroying the space station by shooting a little bullseye. Like, it's so stupid. But who cares? Because it sounds and looks and feels fucking awesome.
Yeah, and I think that this all kind of just hits on a bigger idea, right? Where there's you have all the save the cat bullshit, all of the like tropes and theory about like how to craft a good plot and like what your first act should be and second act and all this stuff like that. And I think that those rules all work within a specific infrastructure, which is like, we are generating movies as a business and we need to make X amount of movies every year and we need to guarantee X amount of profit from these films. And within that infrastructure, in order to make the movies good, you need to follow this formula. And these are movies that just prove that there's something beyond that, where it's these formulas exist to generate art at scale. But when you're not thinking about that, you can have a movie that's like, in a way that doesn't make sense to you, is amazing and it's a masterpiece, even though it doesn't follow any of these rules. And it technically, based on all of this theory, is missing a lot of things that should make it a good movie. And yet it's great. Yeah,
like, have you seen Phil Tippett's Mad God? I love that movie. Like, I love that movie. And I've seen some interesting discourse online of people being like, oh, I really wanted more narrative. I really wish that there'd been more kind of dialogue about, like I wish there'd been a narrative arc to string the metaphor on, as opposed to it being pure metaphor. And
then like, alternatively, all these videos that are dissecting the meaning of things. And it's like, I don't know if that's there. I think that's just you reading very, very far into things. Yeah, the flip side of that coin is the Kubrick, he was secretly talking about how he faked the moon landing in the Shining. Like, I don't know, man. The Shining is another one. That's another movie that's like, there's not a whole lot going on in that movie, and yet we're still talking about it all these years later. Yeah, and yet there is. Like, I think there's a difference between like plot and literal movement, and kind of these stanzas visually, right? Like, that's the thing that's so great about Akira, is that the movie feels simultaneously very grounded and hyper operatic, and the juxtaposition of the well rendered horrific body horror. Oh my God, you can see every vein in Tetsuo's arm, pulsing and ripping and exploding and turning into these giant, weird, gross things. And oh my God, look at that background painting that's there for 30, milliseconds of like this facade of a shining, black obelisk building with neon lights, playing all over it, and there's double lighting and reflecting on reflecting on reflecting, and it's almost like a math equation of how brilliantly it's painted. And that's true from the very beginning, because like right in the very beginning, when you're in that bar with Kaneda, right before that sequence happens, that's really your first, other than that first thing where the kid's being chased with the guy and you're like, what's going on? That's where the movie really starts. And you're just like, you want to stay and like look around the bar, and you're like, what is it? Like you look at the back of his jacket and you're like, what is that? Like, that's some kind of brand from this world or something. And then you're looking at like the jukebox and all the stuff on the walls and the people in the bar. And like, you're already just like, I want to stay in the bar and just like explore this and like learn what all this stuff is in the context of all of this. Yeah. I mean, it's so enthralling, and it sucks you in a way that most films don't. And I think that's why you keep going back to it as a viewer. That's why you keep kind of wanting to live in that world, despite how dreary and depressing it is. And I think that's a testament to the film not being a failure, despite literally being a failure, which is why it's bullshit. It's bullshit the way we do things now. Fucking, everybody's tallying Rotten Tomato scores and, looking at Metacritic ratings and looking at IMDb ratings. And it's just like, yeah, if a bunch of people think it's fucking a 1 out of 10, that doesn't mean that somebody else isn't going to think it's a 10 out of 10. And quite frankly, I don't agree with most people about stuff anyway.
I'm the one that's usually over in the corner being like, I don't know, guys. This comic about a weird dog boy with an erection's kind of the greatest thing ever made. I don't know. It just really bums me out that I think it's a very American thing to try and put a binary on if art is good and or bad.
Yeah, I mean, to a certain degree, yes, but it's also a world born out of algorithms and the way that we communicate through social media now, where everything is. I mean, I saw it's funny because back in like the late 2000s, I saw a TED talk with this dude pre-social media, like understanding the implications of what he was saying, but he was sort of presenting this idea for a world where basically it was essentially that episode of Black Mirror, but like as if it was a good thing, where he was presenting this idea that like, what if we got like achievements, like an Xbox achievement for just things we did. And like when you did something, when you accomplished a task, you got an achievement. Whenever you like helped an old lady across the street, you got an achievement. And like, would that, and that could lead to a better world where everybody's more conscientious and we're less likely to do bad things. And it was almost presented as this like optimistic utopian idea. And obviously it's the opposite of that. It's like a dystopian, almost like Big Brother concept where it's like you're self-policing yourself in this like mass behavior policing, like almost like decentralized totalitarian state, which is kind of what that Black Mirror episode is about. But I think that also applies to just the way that we perceive art and media, where everything is just like, what's the score? What's the aggregate? Does this fit into this category? It's only going to be algorithmically served to you if you have the right keywords and all that stuff like that. That's just that's how we interpret the world now.
As the manga came to a close and his directing career was taking off, there was an interest in producing an anime adaptation of Akira. However, the auteur creator was fearful that anyone other than himself directing the project would completely ruin the vision of the story. Thankfully, after much debate and negotiation, Otomo was allowed to direct the project that would become, at the time, the most expensive animated film in Japanese history. The budget for Akira would come in roughly at 1.1 billion yen. The film, surprisingly, only adapted the first 1/3 of the manga, and chunks from the final volume. The film centers on a relationship between Tetsuo and Kaneda, two members of a local Tokyo juvenile biker gang. We follow their friendship as it deteriorates along with Tetsuo's body due to an accident where he literally runs into an escaped lab patient, unlocking his burgeoning psychic powers. However, unlike the manga, we stop short of following them as they lead rival armies through a bombed-out Neo-Tokyo, fighting for control of the freshly destroyed megacity. We don't get to know an intricately interlaced supporting cast, and we don't see how Akira reshapes the face of Japanese society. Why is this? Because the manga and the film were in production simultaneously. So Katsuhiro Otomo and his assistants were making the manga as Katsuhiro Otomo and his army of animators were making the animated film. Also, there's just no way to cram 2,000 pages of a story into an hour and 20 minutes.
I mean, that's just fucking insane. Like, there have been several like book series and manga that have been adapted into movies or TV shows or anime simultaneously as the source material is still being developed. Like almost every fucking anime is like that. Like, One Piece, the anime, has been in production since the mid 90s and the manga is still in production. Scott Pilgrim versus the World, the movie was being shot before the last volume of it was put out. Famously, Game of Thrones, the last book in that series, still has not ever been written and probably won't ever be written. But the fact that he was developing the manga simultaneously as he was directing the movie is insane. Yeah, and I'm not even talking about from a workload perspective, but just like the idea of like actively developing the narrative of the books as he was like crystallizing it into a film, and like just the feedback loop of that and how difficult that must have been for him to make decisions it's unfathomable.
Structural flaws aside, the film was boundary pushing on multiple fronts. Surprisingly, most anime at the time was animated first, and then actors would try and match the lip movements. However, Otomo insisted that the dialogue should be recorded first, with the actors watching beatboard animatics to understand the context of their performances. This allowed for the animation process to take advantages of the nuances and the performances and increase the quality of production. Additionally, a main source of elevated cost was the fact that Otomo did not like the jerky look of animating on twos for the action sequences. You see, most animation is created by making one drawing for every 2 frames, meaning a traditional camera films in 24 frames per second, and animation is usually done 12 drawings per second. However, thanks to the large-scale action and rapid movement of motorcycles, Otomo insisted that these sequences be animated on ones. That meant that there was twice the animation to produce for these action scenes. In total, roughly 160,000 animation cells were produced for the finished film.
So not only were those motorcycles hand-drawn, but also they were drawing 24 drawings per second of those motorcycles instead of the 12 that they could have totally gotten away with.
Yeah, I mean, you say that flippantly like they totally would have got away with it, but I think that's why everything is so great.
Well, for sure, yeah. I'm not saying it's negligible or like imperceivable to the human eye. Like, I think that's part of why this movie is so special. But I just mean from a production standpoint, nobody was expecting them to do that. Nobody was like, you have to do it this way.
Yeah. Just look at the slavishly rendered trash that Tetsuo drives through and dumps his bike during the opening sequence, or the hyper-detailed motorcycle chassis. Everything about the anime has the same level of fastidiousness and intense level of accuracy that Otomo's original manga drawings had.
This is the construction site that figures so prominently in the story. Each of these dots represents a lighted office window at night. Here they are painting the windows in the building, each one carefully done, as was the lettering. Even the commercials appearing on the TV monitors were precisely drawn. What a job. It requires a great deal of precision and fine work to express the vastness of the city.
Now you can just throw that shit in Procreate and go, Siri, window job.
メカニックを描いているところなんですね。これはヘリコプターの出入り口。
She is working on the mechanics. She's adding some color to one of the helicopters. Each part contains all the details of the real thing. Just take a look at all the different colors. Altogether, there were 327 distinct colors used in this production. It was quite a challenge, especially in animation. But it was necessary to create the effect of a real city.
And the workspace in the studio just looks so cool. It's also hilarious to me how everyone's wearing like cartoon clothing of like somebody that works in an anime studio in the 80s.
This is how the
like,
colors
their
are
the fashion is really 80s, but then they're also wearing like Hayao Miyazaki style like art aprons, you know, like a Bob Ross, like we're gonna start painting now apron, which is just so funny to me.
My God, the subtle difference between those two frames.
Product. Doesn't it look real?
一枚一枚を撮影し、
Here is where the
I mean, I wouldn't say it looked
photograph.
real, but that's kind of a weird description.
It is Asahi Productions in Tokyo.
もちろん
The highest photographic techniques were used in transferring the drawings to film.
1982年
December 6, 1982.
日本のコミッ
The
ク
bi-weekly edition of Japan's immensely popular comics anthology, Young Magazine. It was here that the Akira phenomenon was born.
力が暴走し
Akira, the teenager, awakened to his hidden powers. Powers that he could not control. Powers that swept the megalopolis of Tokyo and the world. In the maelstrom of World War III.
として東京は蘇る
Our stage is Neo Tokyo, the super techno city of 2019. 30 years after the Holocaust. A ravaged city, and one totally unaware of the cause of its misery.
"あらゆる人間を飲み込んだメガロポリス東京。そこにうごめく混沌とした生命力はひとときも休むことなく次々と増殖。
Here in Neo-Tokyo, millions of survivors swell in chaotic vitality and surge forward toward an unknown future.
原作者大友克洋のイメージが結晶化したと言われている。このビデオは映画
It was
There's
this
just something
amazing
about, like,
vitality in the
industrial-
face of anarchy that
industrial
Otomo
stuff that I'm
sought to
always like,
explore
ooh, cool,
in
I
this,
wanna draw
his
that.
greatest work.
But I don't, though. I
Akira.
really don't.
In the next hour, we will interview Otomo and his associates to see how this adaptation was brought to the screen. First, let's get the author's view of the production.
It was never my intention to make Akira into a motion picture. It was originally created as a comic strip for Young magazine. But when I was asked to develop my story for the screen, I became very intrigued. I'd always liked animation, and I'd even gotten together before with some friends to create shorter animated films with other characters. So why not try it with Akira? The difference between comics and animation, well, most obviously, at first, the characters' mouths start moving, and then they start acting. It's just a given with animation that something's got to move. So, when I began working on adapting Akira into an animated film, I thought, just let the characters go. Let them act by themselves. It was in this direction that I first started to develop the concept of Akira as a film. About Neo-Tokyo, it is extremely difficult to express the depth of such a vast city. As I originally developed the comic, I used each issue to build more depth and size to this mammoth city. I kept trying to achieve this by creating a variety of situations to stage the graphic storytelling. But with film, you get to combine all this into one. And I think it is much more convincing on film than in a serialized comic strip. You see, a comic is just a picture. Yet, with animation, you get to add color, sound, and motion. In this way, I felt that I could really create the type of environment that I wanted to depict as Neo-Tokyo. As for the heroes, well, there is no one hero in Akira. In actuality, there are several central characters. Kaneda, Kei, Tetsuo, the Colonel. They could all be called the heroes of this motion picture. It was never my intention to build this story around one central character. Rather, I attempted to show many different perspectives on life and personality in the vast megalopolis of Neo-Tokyo, circa 2019.
For clarity, a normal anime director would not have been given the freedom to animate on ones and implore expensive solutions. However, the momentum that Otomo had going into the production of Akira was almost unprecedented. The book was a critical darling and a massive commercial success for Young magazine and its publisher Kodansha. The typical business model for anime in Japan is that you have a magazine that serializes a lot of manga stories, and then you just hope one of them reaches breakthrough popularity. Then if that happens, you merchandise the shit out of it and make an anime adaptation and cash in. While it might seem like a risky decision to have a creative genius who is obviously very precious about his creation at the helm, powers that be felt this was the only option. Simultaneous to producing the film, Otomo was also attempting to end his long-running manga. It would take a full 2 years past the release of the film, but he would eventually do it. He went on record multiple times about his struggles with how to bring the story to a close. However, after talking to famed auteur director and comic book creator Alejandro Jodorowsky, he came up with a very surreal, bizarre, and yet ultimately satisfying ending for the manga. However, the topping of endings would not leave Otomo's life for long. When Akira was finally released in Japan, theatrically on July 16th, 1988, it would only earn 750 million yen. This was perceived as a failure on the grandest scale. Was it actually a career-ending bomb? No. However, Otomo was seen as the chosen one, the true inheritor to the crown of Osamu Tezuka, the next generation of mangaka turned filmmaker who would redefine what popular culture meant. And this film, having failed to live up to that promise, was the ultimate defeat. Many pointed to the ending of the film as the reason why it underperformed. This failure haunted Otomo for years afterward. However, while the genius storyteller was licking his wounds, something else was happening across the globe. A rumbling that would rewrite the legacy of both the creator and the project.
It was me
Act
being
2.
born. It was us being born.
Yeah. That's what it was. Yeah. Act 2, and things were never the same. Anime had made its way to the United States in the late 1960s and early 1970s, with early translation efforts around properties like Speed Racer and Battle of the Planets, taking on moderate levels of success. However, by the 1980s, VHS dupe trading services and mail-away VHS companies had started to spring up across the country. Americans were becoming more and more interested in Japanese animation with every passing year. By the time we hit 1988, there was a stalwart base of people in the States that were really into anime. However, there needed to be a mainstreaming of the interest in order to get the American movie business to sit up and actually pay attention. In May of 1991, Streamline Video put out Akira, dubbed in the United States. This release was so successful for the indie company that Orion Home Video, a major player at the time, stepped in to re-release the film in September of 1993. By the end of that year, Akira had sold 60,000 units in England, 100,000 across Europe, and another 100,000 in America. It was a bona fide hit, and with people who previously had no exposure to anime. A similar thing was happening in Japan as well. Despite being DOA during its initial theatrical run, the film was taking on a rabid cult following and even talked about as the greatest animated film of all time. Otomo's legacy was rapidly being rewritten year by year. This success led directly to the creation of Manga Entertainment, a subsidiary of Island Records. Manga Entertainment's whole reason for existing was to supply a newly ravenous fan base. Alongside Akira, they put out Appleseed, Battle Angel Alita, Ghost in the Shell, and countless others. Before you know it, Pokemon is on weekday afternoons, joined by Dragon Ball Z, Digimon, and Sailor Moon. Manga and anime are a tangible and potent part of American life, with a ravenous fan base and billions of dollars in merchandise generated every year. We love Attack on Titan and My Hero Academia in the same way that we love domestic projects, like Spider-Man and Star Wars. They are a structural part of our culture, and it only goes back to one moment, one hyper-specifically cool, intangibly strange piece of media. A story about two friends, psychic warfare, and a military-industrial complex in a post-apocalyptic future that seems simultaneously very far away and hauntingly close. I think it's pretty apparent that we both really like Akira. And I just want to underline how aberrant it is that somebody just gets handed the keys to the kingdom like Otomo did. And I think that in and of itself is almost a bigger commercial for the book. You know what I mean? Like, I think if there was another person directing the anime, it would have been great. It would have been cool, but it would have been different, and it wouldn't have been, almost for lack of a better term, like the Stan Lee-ification of Akira, because it is so, like, the versions of it that exist are made with the guiding hand of Katsuhiro Otomo. And this is why I don't need a fucking live-action American Akira. Like, I just don't need it.
You don't need a live-action Akira starring Keanu Reeves, directed by, who was it going to be for a while there?
The Hughes brothers at one point.
Then it was like Taika Waititi recently.
And Jordan Peele got offered it maybe.
Jordan
I just
Peele.
don't need any. I don't need a Christopher Nolan, Leonardo DiCaprio.
Yeah, Christopher Nolan and Leonardo DiCaprio one. That was the one from like a while back. That was the one that they were talking about for a while.
Yeah, I just don't need
back
that.
in like 2010.
Yeah, just don't. I do not need that at all.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I think, you know, other than other than some specific outliers, like, off the top of my head, obviously we did a whole episode about Speed Racer, a movie that I think really captures the frenetic intensity of that anime and anime in general. There's also this Takashi Miike movie called Yatterman, which is a live action adaptation of an anime called Yatterman that I think also similarly like achieves like actually translating the frenetic intensity of anime into live action. But I think other than a few specific examples, that's just it's not an easy thing to translate animation in general to live action, let alone the specific aesthetic and mechanics of anime. And it's funny because I just saw this TikTok the other day where somebody was comparing the intro to the Fairly Odd Parents show, the cartoon, to the intro to the live action version that they just made for Disney Plus, or not Disney Plus, whatever, fucking Netflix or whatever.
There's a live action Fairly Odd Parents show?
Yeah.
Oh my God. This is what?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. It's like Fairly Odd Parents, Fairly Odder or something like that. And it's like Timmy Turner is an adult and he like gives the fairy godparents to two new kids.
Is this real?
Yeah.
Drake Bell is in this?
Is he? No,
Maybe this can't be real. This can't be real.
That was
a Fairly Odd Parent. Oh, that was in 2011?
That was like a made for TV movie where I think Drake Bell played Timmy Turner. There's a show now.
Fairly Odder.
Yeah, they wouldn't
wow. But the Fairly Odd Parents
are
are still animated, so it's like a Roger Rabbit thing.
Yeah, and they look the same. Like they're animated. They look the same as they did in the show. It's weird.
Wow. What the fuck? This is so weird. It's a Paramount Plus original. Wow. I'd literally not even heard that this show existed, and my mind is kind of blown.
I only heard about it from people kind of making fun of it on TikTok, because somebody was comparing the intros to the two shows, and they're talking about the specific part where in the intro where it's like, obtuse rubber goose, something guava juice, giant snake, birthday cake, blah 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 blah. And so it's basically like showing all the different wishes that he can wish for. And in the intro, it's like showing like, those things are appearing in front of him, and Vicky turns into a giant snake and all this stuff. And it's like this, it's just basically like conveying the imaginative concept of what the show is. And then in the live action version, that part of the intro song, when it gets to that part of just naming off wishes that they're making, they're just standing there, and then like it does like a jump cut to them sitting in chairs, and then the things that they're naming off are just like really normal things, and they're just kind of appearing in their hands, like, apple pie, something like just normal stuff, and it's just appearing in their hands. And they were using that as an example of how like animation just can't translate to live action very well, because it's like, yeah, you can't, like, when it comes to animation, like the sky's the limit of whatever you want to imagine for Timmy Turner to wish for, and then you can show it actually happening. Whereas in a live action show, it's like you can't do that. You're sort of you're confined to whatever like things that the PA found at Party City like an hour ago or whatever.
Especially with a fucking like Nickelodeon live action show where it's like, all right, guys, we've got a piñata, some party hats, and red silly cups. Let's do this.
Yeah. And so it's that, and it also kind of reminds me of the discourse about like adapting video games into movies, where people are just like, yeah, like The Last of Us, like that's perfect for a movie. Like it has such a great story. And it's like, yeah, I mean, it has a great story for an interactive video game. And I think that's a lot of times with these, when they try to adapt a video game into a movie, the thing that they realize is that in the translation, it's like, oh yeah, like it had a great story for a video game where you're interacting with the world, but like as a movie, this is just kind of like the road. Like it has a very specific uniqueness in its medium, and that those two things kind of just make me think about this and how like no matter what they would do with a live action Akira movie, like it would just not be, it just wouldn't translate. Like they wouldn't be able to translate the visuals or what happens in the movie. It would just, no matter what, it would be disappointing. And also they just wouldn't be able to like translate what made that movie as special as it was. Cause like even little things like that production technique that they use 24 frames a second to animate, like movies are already 24 frames a second. So like you can't even recreate the magic of that. So yeah, it's like no matter who made an Akira movie, even if they actually cast like real actual Japanese people in the movie instead of Leonardo DiCaprio, like no matter what, it's not going to be good. Like, it's not going to be good.
I just don't need it. Like it exists. That being said, I am interested in the fact that they're purportedly working on a full anime adaptation of the series with Otomo overseeing it all. Like that's interesting to me because it's a new thing that hasn't been done. They haven't adapted the whole story. We've seen what happens when you try and cram 2,000 pages into 2 hours. It doesn't really work. But as a TV show with specifically Otomo overseeing it all, I don't know. Maybe that could be cool. Frankly, I still don't really need it. But if Otomo is the one being like, "Oh no, this is going to be cool," then I'm along for the ride.
Like, all right, we're doing an anime. I'm overseeing it. It's going to be a faithful adaptation of the manga. Every piece of the story, nothing's getting left out. But Kaneda is going to be an animated Leonardo DiCaprio.
That's the thing that's always been so weird to me is that they're going to do characters in Neo Tokyo named Kaneda Tetsuo, and it's always white dudes that they're talking about have being the main character, and I'm like, I don't know, man. And I know a bunch of the things have been like, it's been transposed into Neo New York, and I'm like, really?
Yeah, well, I think that there was a place there was a place for that kind of like localization at a time. Like there was because a lot of they've done that a lot. Like the Ring movies, Ringu was made into a series of American films where it was like set in America and featured American, mostly white people. But that was back in a time whenever we didn't get Ringu in the United States, and there was much more of a barrier of like media and pop culture. But now it's like we're a global society, so I really don't see a need to like make a white person version of anything anymore.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, I think my closing thoughts are the Akira bike slide is fucking cool, or the Kaneda bike slide is fucking cool. It's been adapted into all these different fucking forms, which is always really fun to see. And also, I love Akira, both as a manga and the film. I love Katsuhiro Otomo. I really like his son's work, Shohei Otomo. If you're not up on that Shohei saying hey to you, go check out his work. He's a really talented illustrator as well. And it's fascinating how you get these kind of cultural pivot points, where you have enough momentum for something that it just busts open this new lane. And without Akira, anime, Pokemon, Digimon, none of that shit would be in the States, and our culture would be much less for it. And also, the more we're talking about these vibes only movies, the more I'm kind of like, are all my favorite movies vibes only movie? Like, do I just only like movies that are about the vibes? Maybe, I don't know.
I think that is the case. I mean, from somebody who's like, a whole movie can be ruined for you if just like the costume isn't good. Like, I think you are a vibes only. It's just all Davey and vibes.
Bitch, don't kill my vibes.
Yeah, or else he'll hate your movie forever.
Andrew, what are your closing thoughts about a little bit of the Akira, a little bit of how the anime industry evolved, your connection to it? What's your final thoughts on this bad boy?
Well, really quick, before I get to that, I just have to quickly shout out the thing that we didn't talk about because it wasn't necessarily germane to the discussion, but I do have to say that in addition to the film being amazing, the soundtrack to Akira, which we've heard a little bit of, is one of the greatest movie, animated film at all soundtracks of all time. It was done by Gino Yamashiragumi, which is like which was like a musical collective that was a group of people, and it was largely patterned after like a combination between like Indonesian chant music and then Japanese no music. And you know, if you've ever watched any kind of like nature documentary that goes to, you know, Indonesia, and you've seen like tribes of people doing that kind of like group chanting where they're all kind of like in a big circle, like that's Indonesian chanting music. And then Japanese no music is like, if you've ever heard in like any kind of Japanese media, those things where it'll be like a little, like these like intermittent drums, and then a guy will go like, yo, like that's no music. And so they basically took those two styles and combined them, which is like a really interesting choice, right? Because like you would think like, oh, like, yeah, Akira, it's going to have like some like synth wave type, like, you know, pulsing synthesizer sci-fi music, but they decided to go completely almost stylistically in the opposite direction with the music, to like just breathtaking effect. So I had to shout out the soundtrack because it's one of my favorite movie soundtracks of all time. But yeah, I you know, just in the closing thoughts, I fully agree. I think it's absolutely insane. The sequence of events that led to where we are now, where, you know, even whenever we were a little younger, like whenever we were in high school and a little bit of out of high school, like when I was working at Borders and whenever you were working at Borders, you know, there'd be like huge groups of weebs that would come in and buy like literal stacks of manga volumes. Like these kids would come in and they would literally come in and buy like 20 manga volumes a week. Just the critical mass of consumption. And now we're at the place we are now where manga and anime are almost like a dominant pop cultural form in the United States. And all of that came from, like I said, almost this Trojan horse gambit where they were like, oh, this movie looks really good. It's got like great production values. And there are several key moments in the film where there's just some really gross, gory shit. So let's just cut together a trailer with like rock music of just showing like people's faces exploding, and we'll like sell some videotapes off of this. And from that, like taking a just like beautiful work of art and repackaging it as a sales tool to make money, almost kind of in a clickbait way, because that's really not what Akira is. That one singular sort of business decision completely reshaped the popularity and the influence of Japanese manga and anime in the United States. And that's crazy. It's just a mind-blowing ripple effect in the history of our pop cultural world that it's kind of hard to wrap your mind around. Like that one movie and that one decision kind of led to where we are today. And I'm glad it did.
That was a weird dismount. It was a weird dismount. It was like all these grandiose, gravitas-filled statements.
I didn't want to end on just like...
And it's cool.
I didn't want to end on just like, it was fucking crazy, man. Like I didn't want to end it on like a nebulous, like, shit's wild. So I wanted to think of some better way to end it. Maybe I didn't.
Well, I respect it. I respect a clumsy dismount. And on that note, I'm Dave Baker. This has been Deep Cuts. If you'd like to find me on the internet, you can do so at heydavebaker.com, where you can pre-order my book, Halloween Boy. This is the last week that it's going to be up on the site, and then I'm going to put the order in at the printer. So if you are into weird shit like Akira, probably buy Halloween Boy. They're not really that related, but I'm choosing to say that they are. Spandrew. Also, Halloween Boy is like an action-adventure comic about a weirdo, spooky Doc Savage-style adventurer in a bizarre future. Spandrew, where can people find you on the internet?
You can find me riding my giant motorcycle down the streets of Neo Purgatory 7, and I see Dave across the road, and I scream, Dave! And he screams, Spandrew! And then
which one of us is Tetsuo and which one is Kaneda? That's the real question.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're Tetsuo.
I'll take it. I'll fucking take it, baby.
You're definitely gonna like bulge to like a giant like blob monster and like crush Freddy in your skin folds one day. And you can't find me on social media because I don't use social media. But if you want to pre-order Dave's book, Halloween Boy, once again, go to heydavebaker.com. If you want to know more about the book, you can hear me as a paid shill talking about it and giving it compliments on last episode after Dave handsomely compensated me. And you can also find us on Facebook by searching Deep Cuts Podcast. You can join our Facebook group, Deep Cuts Podcast Facebook group. You can join our Discord server, bit.ly.com/deepcutsdiscord. You can follow us on Instagram at deepcutspod. You can follow us on TikTok at Mystery Treehouse. And if you haven't dropped your final rent money on Dave's book, there's also a couple of the Simple Code tape comics left over. It's a hi-fi cassette tape with the full 9-track Napster musical from the Napster episode that was the season finale of season 1 of Deep Cuts. And in the tape, there's also a 5-page full-color comic that was written by Papa Pricey and drawn by Brandon Nebbit with cover colors by Shannon Willett. There's still a couple copies of that left. Probably won't print any more after that unless there's some kind of spike in demand, but otherwise they're probably going to be the last ones we make. So if you still want one of those, pick them up. And if you are waiting on one, I'm making my way downtown, walking fast, faces past as I'm homebound. I'll be back in LA soon, and I'll ship those off to you guys. Deep Cuts is a production by Boy Genius Media. If you'd like to find this show and others like it, please visit boygeniusmedia.com or deepcutspod.com.
If you want to join in on post-episode discussions, please join the Deep Cuts Podcast Facebook group. Finally, subscribe to our YouTube channel for additional video content.